Hello and welcome to the Elizabeth Rossitsan show here on BarnBurner and Zingo TV channel 250. Today joining me is Rain Hernandez, who is my classmate at Ryerson University in the sport media program. Rain is also a contributor for the OHL network, McKean's hockey scouting website, and is a correspondent for youth sports. Rain, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth. I'm glad to be on the show.
So we're going to discuss a lot of topics today, including youth sports, OHL, and if we have time, NHL and NBA and the big leagues as well. But I want to mostly focus on youth sports and OHL and some scouting as well, because Rain, that's what you kind of specialize in. But before we start that off, I do want to remind everyone to download both the BarnBurner and Zingo TV apps. They're available on iOS and Android devices, and they're completely free, so make sure to go ahead and do that. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, and Fire TV sticks, Roku and Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs starting from 2016 and forward. So make sure to do that, and also visit the barnburner.ca website. But now, without any further ado, I do want to start off our conversation. But first, Rain, I do want to ask you, what have you been doing during quarantine? I know you've been staying pretty busy and doing a lot of different projects. So just tell everyone, what have you been doing recently?
Yeah, so this quarantine started around March or so. I was actually getting ready to start covering the OHL Cup, which is a highly coveted minor midget tournament, and that's for OHL players heading into the league and playing with their AAA teams. So once that got canceled, everything went all over the place, and then I've recently I've just been working on stuff with the Oakville Blades, more so some scouting stuff inside their front office. So we're just getting ready for the season. We're supposed to be starting up pretty soon with everything opening up. So we're just getting ready, some last minute parts to get our team ready. And then also just some graphic stuff. I've just been trying to hone my skill there. I've been making some fan art for some Michigan athletes. So that's always been fun to do. And also starting up the job with McKean. So that was a really cool opportunity. And now we're in full force and slowly but surely getting there. And I'm excited for what the future brings.
So that's kind of what I wanted to ask you next about your job with McKean's. So McKean's is one of the biggest scouting sites, I would say, and it's pretty amazing that you're doing work for them now. How did that happen? Did you apply? Did they kind of notice you? How did you get that gig?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. With McKean's, I think they knew who I was based on my OHL draft coverage with OHL Network. I've been covering the OHL draft, I think, for maybe a year and a half now, but I've always been following the OHL draft since, I was, in my younger days, right? Even when I was still playing, I was still looking at, who was at the top and who's the best of the best there. So that always intrigued me. And then I got in touch with Brock Oden, who is OHL Prospects that everyone knows on Twitter. And he asked me to be a part of one of their surveys, actually numerous surveys. So I think I've been on 3 with him. So he really enjoyed my work. He was really impressed by me. So he put in a word for me at McKean's Hockey because they were looking to add some new fresh talent. And then he got me in touch with the people at McKean's, and I guess the rest is history. So I give a huge kudos to him, and I'm really excited for what the future holds with McKean's.
And I mean, that's great because a lot of people, I think, especially during quarantine, kind of are losing jobs and losing opportunities. But for you to get into such a big scouting site is a pretty big deal. But has quarantine affected any of your projects that you were planning to do but couldn't because of this whole pandemic situation?
Yeah, so I think it starts back with the OHL Cup. I was actually supposed to work with the Ontario Hockey League and cover that tournament and post game recaps for them. And sadly, we didn't get the opportunity to do that. So hopefully next year, if the tournament rolls around again, I'll be back there and getting the job done. But I think other than that, I think it's all stemmed with everything being canceled. I think like with the Oakville Blades, the junior hockey team I work for, we had an opportunity to go far and potentially make nationals, considering we won the league last year and considering how well we performed in the first round. So it's it's tough to see those kids not get the opportunity that they wanted, but health comes first, health safety comes first. So other than those projects, not ending up how I wanted it to be, I'm really thankful that, the quarantine's been helping out everyone. So, it is what it is, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And are there any plans that, any projects, I guess, or assignments that you have planned for the future? Or I know it's, especially in these times, it's kind of hard to predict anything, but is there anything you have planned?
Yeah, I think I have a few stuff in mind. I think the main thing is getting ready for the upcoming 2021 OHL draft. So this season's coming up, and Hockey Canada is slowly opening up everything, slowly getting people back on the ice so that they can get their season started. So I think once that happens, the OHL draft coverage will ramp up, and I'll be able to do something that I love again, and we'll be back at it. So I think that's the main thing that I'll be focusing on, as well as just increasing what we've done with the Oakville Blades, and just grow the brand there, and continue to grow that junior hockey juggernaut that we have.
Well, that's great, and I hope all of that works out and quarantine doesn't get in the way of anything else, because I know it's kind of hard for everyone to plan ahead right now. But now I do want to move on to youth sports and talk a little bit about that, because I know you've done a lot of work for them, and you follow youth sports quite a bit. So I know youth sports are canceling their fall season, and for obvious reasons, and most classes and most universities are going to be online, so it makes sense that sports are canceled as well. How do you think, in general, youth sports as an organization has dealt with the pandemic?
I think they dealt with it perfectly. I think we saw, in March with the U Sports National Championships going on, we saw in Halifax with the men's hockey that, once the pandemic became serious, they just ended up canceling the tournament, which is obviously heartbreaking to the teams that were involved, and, all those guys looking to win a national championship. But at the end of the day, health and safety comes first, and they just canceled the tournament right away, even though there was already a game played, right? So I think I think they've done a great job, just making sure they keep it safe, and making sure that when they do come back, it's a huge impact, rather than rushing into it and possibly having the possibility of canceling again, like the MLB that they just had this morning, right? So I think they've done a great job, and when we do end up coming back, it'll be something special for sure.
And do you think, I know that the major tournaments have been canceled and there will be no youth sports for the duration of the fall semester. But which competitions are confirmed to be canceled? And also, do you know or have an idea when youth sports might come back?
Yeah, so I think with the OUA and the other leagues, that they said all fall sports were canceled until, I guess, January 1st, until, I guess, 2021. I thought that was a little premature, just because with all the other, say the junior hockey leagues that have the same situation, and they're dealing with having more fans. They're waiting until they can get fans into their rinks so that they can you know uh, re- generate some revenue. But I think with youth sports, it was a little premature, especially with everything opening up. But I do understand that health and safety is first, so I totally get it. But yeah, so I think if youth sports were to open up, say like the OUA, I would have recommended maybe breaking up the divisions, just making sure teams don't travel as far as they should. Although you do end up playing the same teams over and over again, at least you still have a league, but you're not traveling as much, and you're not having the possibility of spreading the virus, and say something Belleville or say in those areas or whatnot. But yeah, I think that's where we are with youth sports. But I think we should wait until everything is all cleared up, and we should be good to go.
Yeah, I agree. I think safety is number one right now, and I think as sad as it is to not see youth sports in the fall, I think they made the right call with that. But how do you think this will affect student athletes? Because it's kind of a unique situation for them because they have a certain amount of years for eligibility to be a student athlete. So how do you think youth sports will go about that? Will they extend certain athletes eligibility, and how will this impact student athletes in general?
Yeah, I think we ended up seeing that they would extend the eligibility of certain players, of seniors, but I also see the other side of it where you don't really want your incoming freshman, your 18-year-old, to be playing against 26-year-olds, right? I think that's a little bit unfair and a little bit unsafe, right? So I think it's a heartbreaking situation for all the college athletes because they're expecting to be in school for 4 or 5 years, but now with this COVID going on, they get the extension. They're going to be there for 6 years, right? And that ultimately creates a lot of confusion and a lot of disparity. I would say. I think some players won't even play this year regardless, and maybe they just end up taking the 5 years because they just want to get out of school as quick as possible, right? So I think with the college athletes, they are really getting the short end of the stick here. That it's affecting their college experience for sure. But I think regardless of what happens, I think everyone wants to get back to their respective sport and getting to play. So we're just hoping for that to come in the future.
And also, some other people that this will really affect, I think, are youth sports coaches, because that's kind of their job.
Yeah.
Well, do you think youth sports will provide some sort of compensation and give a certain amount of money to the coaches who just can't work throughout this period?
Yeah, I think ultimately it depends on the school that these coaches are working for.
Mhm.
I think just because even though they're not coaching at the moment, there's still a lot to do. I think even though some recruits can't travel to the school that they want to visit and check it out, and I still think recruiting can still be done, like say through Zoom. So I think coaches still have some stuff to work through. I think. But other than that, I think it would be up to the school for them to provide that.
And you mentioned recruiting can be done through online Zoom. And I know certain sports teams, like outside of youth sports, I know certain baseball teams in Canada have been recruiting through online, or even they get players to send in videos. Do you think that that's enough kind of to see the athlete through video, or do you think that would kind of be unfair to certain athletes?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Like, we've been doing a lot of stuff with the blades, like doing as much as we can. I think the main thing that everyone would want to do is see the person up close and live in person. But the highlight reel sort of gives us an idea of what his skill set or what the player's skill set is like. So we like to look at that a little bit. But following that highlight reel, I like to go back and watch some film, like from a legitimate game and what he does shift by shift. So I think recruiting can be done through Zoom and through just video and just looking at someone through the internet. However, I think legitimately seeing someone and getting to know them and noticing their demeanor and how they act around players and how they act around their parents, etc. I think that's also very crucial. And unfortunately, we can't do that at the moment, or not for a little bit. So this is the best we can do, and I think we've done a good job with it.
For sure. And that kind of covers you sports. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. And I think you really cleared things up because I think a lot of people were really confused by the situation, especially because, it's really different for student athletes. But now I want to move on to OHL. So kind of the same thing. How has the quarantine and COVID affected the OHL? What has been canceled? What has not been canceled? What's the whole situation in the OHL right now?
Yeah, so I think the OHL is a really interesting league to follow through this whole COVID pandemic. So, as we know, or as I said previously, that the OHL Cup had to cancel. Like that was canceled when quarantine started. So that was like the beginning of March, and then the OHL draft ended up to go through no problem. And then before that, they officially canceled the season. So I think now the OHL is in a situation where they're sort of waiting for when they should open the league up, because most of the junior teams make their bread and butter through getting fans into the stands, and when you can't do that at the moment, it poses a lot of problems to these said junior teams. So with that, it's up in the air. And I think with there's players that are looking to get drafted in the NHL. I think if the league starts and the NHL is still going on and there's still no NHL draft that hasn't happened yet, I think we're going to see a lot of OHL players decide to not play, and so that they don't hurt their draft stock. So I think the OHL is in a really rough situation, but I think they'll get through it. And I think once time continues to free up all like the quarantine restrictions, I think the OHL will open up soon, but I think they'll wait for the right time to do it.
And when they do come back, do you think they'll take certain safety measures? Do you think they'll take a similar approach to the NHL? Do you think they'll kind of do hub cities, or will they kind of continue with their regular their regular schedule? What do you think they will enforce?
Yeah, I think at this point, or at this rate, where the world is right now, I think you'd have to it would be mandatory to add some safety measures, health and safety measures. I think the idea of shortening the schedule, or shortening the distance that teams have to travel. So although you are playing the same team over and over again, at least you do get a season, but you don't have to travel as far. So I think that's something that the OHL might have to look into, and I think that would work for them for sure.
And obviously you said this affects players and prospects, but who do you think are the top OHL prospects in this year's draft? Even though it's quite different, do you have anyone in mind?
Yeah, so I'll just start off with with the OHL players that are looking to get drafted into the NHL. So I think the best OHL prospect that we have is Quinton Byfield. I think personally, I think he's the best prospect in the 2020 draft, including Alexis Lafreniere. I think his combination of size and speed is just unmatched, and I think he has the potential to be, a top flight center in this league. And then I think, the best defenseman in this draft is Jamie Drysdale, who plays for the Erie Otters. I think he's a complete defenseman who's got just beautiful skating and really can make that first pass properly. And, he's not the biggest defenseman, but he uses his body really well to disengage the player with the puck. And I think another player that not enough people are talking about, even though he was a top scorer in the OHL, is Ottawa 67 forward Marco Rossi. I think, despite his size, I think he's a perfect centerman. I think he plays defensively really well, and he lights up the score sheet. He's a tremendous playmaker, and he's got an underrated shot. So I think he's got all the tools to be a, very good center in the NHL for sure.
Well, that kind of wraps it up with OHL. We talked about youth sports. We talked a bit about your projects, but now I want to get into the bigger leagues. So I'm assuming you've been following all the leagues and all the sports, and I know different leagues are at different stages. The MLS is already finishing up. NFL hasn't even started. MLB is already might be shutting down. All the leagues are in different stages. But in your opinion, which league do you think handled this whole pandemic situation the best?
I think easily, without a doubt, it was Adam Silver in the NBA. I think, that night we were in class when the league canceled and Rudy Gobert got COVID. Adam Silver didn't hesitate but to cancel the league right away and make sure to educate, the rest of the league on how to handle this COVID pandemic. So I think they handle it perfectly. They were the first ones to create the idea of the bubble, and Orlando has been looking marvelous. It's a brilliant idea, and I think 5-10 years from now, it's going to be one of the most creative thinking that we've ever seen in sport. So I think they've done a marvelous job dealing with the COVID pandemic. The bubble will do wonders for this league, and I think they've done the best job for sure.
And now I want to talk a bit about the NFL. So the NFL is the league that hasn't yet started, and I feel like NFL had a little bit of an advantage because they could sit back and look how other leagues were handling this. But now the league and the players union have reached an agreement, so they're canceling the preseason games. They also came to an agreement with the money, so the stipend will be $350,000 for medical opt-outs and $150,000 for voluntary opt-outs. So I think every league is kind of doing a little bit, like I know some leagues are just telling players that they can opt out and they won't be punished, but the NFL is compensating players even if they opt out. Do you think this is fair? Do you think the amount of money, 350,000 or 150,000 obviously isn't even half of what some players are getting, but do you think that's enough? And do you think they're kind of going right about this? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I think the main thing that NFL players were struggling about was to make sure that they were, properly playing while being safe. I think a lot of players were worrying about the sanctions or the rules that the NFL had, and they weren't very strict on the health code violations for COVID. We saw with a bunch of college programs such as Clemson, they got, a lot of their players test positive for COVID, even though they were still training regardless of the pandemic going on. So I think it's a really interesting situation. As for the medical opt-outs and the voluntary opt-outs, I think the players have the right to decide whether or not they want to play or not, because at the end of the day, it's their health and safety, and they still have families that they have to worry about. So I think it's the same thing with the NFL. I think they really want to get people in the stands so that they can continue their season, but at the end of the day, that's just highly unlikely. So I still think that they're looking to get the season on, and hopefully we see my Colts, have a good season.
And another thing, the NFLPA agreed to have no preseason games at all. At first, they wanted to have like kind of a shortened preseason. Now they agreed to no preseason games. What do you think about that? Do you think it's the right call? Because obviously these players haven't played for a while and they will have training camps and all of that. But do you think it was right decision to cancel all preseason games?
Oh, 100%. I think even prior to the pandemic, a lot of people didn't like the preseason at all. I myself as well. I didn't really like the preseason just because, you're putting your best players in danger of possibly being injured, and we see it every single year. Always see a top player get injured in preseason when a game doesn't matter. And at the end of the day, you want to see those best players on Sunday. You want to see those best players on a Monday night. And when you don't get to see them because of a preseason injury, it's a little rough. So I think canceling the preseason is a great idea, and I think they should continue it in the future just because you want to keep that longevity of your star players, and without preseason, that's 4 more games they don't have to worry about. So yeah, I am all in of canceling preseason.
For sure. And now I want to touch a topic that's kind of been talked a lot about on these shows on BarnBurner, and it's been discussed. And obviously, you've heard about it. So, Washington revealed that it's changing its name from the Redskins because, it created controversy, was offensive to certain people, and certain people and certain organizations expressed their concerns. But now they're going to start off their season without a name at all because they said that it's, they can't just pick a name, and already more than 1,000 names have been discussed, but they're going to start off the season without a name at all and they're just going to be called the team or something in kind of like that. First of all, what do you think about the situation? Do you think it was a right call to change the name? Because I think, even though it is a little bit controversial, it carries a big history behind it. So what do you think about the whole name change?
Yeah, I think I understand both sides of the argument. I think, like for a person like myself who grew up as a Chicago Blackhawks fan, you know, you see the logo and I guess or it is offensive to the indigenous people, and I think the difference between the Blackhawks and the Redskins is that the Redskins is actually a you know like a very vulgar term, into calling someone that's an indigenous people. So I think I totally thought that a name change was appropriate just because I think that's a little crossing the line and their logo as well. But I also do see the side of, it's history and whatnot. But I think, history is supposed to be changed, right? And you're also changed for the future. So, and I also think, Washington keeping it as like Washington's football team is not that big of a deal to me. I still think, they should be patient with changing the right name because, they've had that name for 60, 70 years, right? So just to rush it and, put in a name that at the end, people won't really like, wouldn't be the best of ideas. So I think this is the right move for them for sure.
For sure. And I agree with you. And I think they should take their time with this decision. And I don't think it's a big deal for them to go by Washington football team for a bit. But do you think that other teams, as you said, you're a big Blackhawks, you like the Blackhawks a lot, and there's some other teams in some other leagues that refer to Indigenous people and the Blackhawks as well. Do you think those teams will follow, the former Redskins, Washington, and start changing their names as well?
Yeah, I think with the Blackhawks though, they were in talks with the Blackhawk community in Illinois, and they seem to be okay with it. And or from what I've read on the Blackhawks page, and they're also an original six team, and they've it's not really that offensive from what I've heard. But I think with the other teams, I think it's like with the Eskimos, I've heard they're already changing their name, and there are other teams like the Cleveland Indians. That's also pretty that could be changed for sure. So we've already seen it with their logo. They took away the Chief Wahoo, and now they're just the C. So I think we are in a state of change where some names do need to be changed up. So we'll see what happens in the future.
Well, now I want to move on to the NHL and discuss a bit what's happening there because the NHL announced their 24 teams roster. Players, staff are arriving in the hub cities, Edmonton and Toronto. Everyone's ready to go. I've seen pictures of the hub cities, the stadiums kind of where the fans are, it's covered up and TV screens are placed. And the first exhibition game is going to go on tomorrow, Toronto, Montreal. Everyone's excited for that. What do you think we can expect from that game tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm really excited for hockey coming back up and Toronto and Edmonton being the hub cities. I know we won't be able to go in there, but it'll still be a cool feeling knowing that playoff hockey is happening. Just a half hour away from me, so it's a good look. I think with the exhibition games tomorrow, I wouldn't think too much of it. These guys haven't played for 4 or 5 months. So they've literally waited for an entire off season to just get back onto the ice and get back into playing. So I think we are going to see a lot of rust being come off. But regardless, I'm really excited to watch it, and it's going to be a good game.
For sure. And speaking of the hub cities, obviously before Toronto and Edmonton were selected, there was a lot of discussions going on. And first, Vegas was the favorite, and they've kind of went back and forth. Did you think they made the right call by making two hub cities in Canada, Toronto and Edmonton?
Yeah, 100%. I think with Las Vegas, the UFC is having a real big issue with it. They're just in Abu Dhabi for their Fight Island series where they had, 3 or 4 fights, and they had their own little bubble as well in Abu Dhabi. And Abu Dhabi is one of the safest countries in the world in regards to the COVID pandemic. So I think not choosing Vegas was a very good idea because, like I said, with the UFC, they're actually supposed to go back on Saturday for a few weeks, and they're supposed to have one of their biggest events of the year with the heavyweight championship being on the line. So, and also since the COVID stats really went up in Nevada, it's up in the air, and they don't know what they're going to do. So now that Vegas and like the whole state of Nevada might be thinking about another lockdown, it's a good thing the NHL didn't go there because it would have caused a lot of problems. Whereas we're seeing in Edmonton and Toronto, the stats of COVID are continuing to decrease as we speak. And, we're seeing things opening up slowly but surely. So I think choosing Canadian cities over American cities at this point was a very good idea. And even though Vegas has a really good atmosphere there for the players, I think it'd be really unsafe because a lot of players would end up leaving that bubble and possibly bringing in the COVID in because you never know, right?
For sure. And another thing, Toronto, Edmonton is kind of another story because it's not as busy as Toronto, I would say. But Toronto, the arena is right downtown, so they've blocked off, what the main streets, Front Street's blocked off, Adelaide's blocked off. A lot of major streets are blocked off, and especially now when everything, as you said, slowly but surely is opening up, and people are kind of getting back to their lives and going to work and kind of starting action is starting back up again. Do you think these closures of streets and this bubble in Toronto will cause problems with, the citizens of Toronto?
I personally don't think so. I think we all know that we're in a really weird period in our lives, something that really no one has ever experienced before. So I think they'd be understandable that, a legitimate professional sports league is trying to finish their season in Toronto. So nonetheless, it's a big honor that they chose Toronto and, that type of thing. So that takes a lot of pride in itself. But yeah, I do think a lot of people are going to be affected by this, whether it's going to work. But I think, we have to deal with that problem all the time, dealing with traffic and whatnot. So I think it's nothing new, coming from downtown because we've seen a lot of, crazy situations there. So I think it's still a good move regardless. And even though everything's opening back up, we're still, protecting the players and making sure they don't get anything.
And Ray, I'm just interested to see who are your picks for, for the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are asking about that, and I think I don't think I can give you an answer as to who I think will be in the Cup final, but I think I can give you two teams that I think will go far, if that helps. So I think from the Western Conference side, I think a team that we should always be looking at. Obviously, there's bias here, but the Chicago Blackhawks, they got a really good matchup with the Edmonton Oilers, and although I don't think that they'll be, a cup contender, I do think that they have the possibility of, creating an upset in Edmonton and, possibly making it on to the next round. But I think Tampa looks really well. I think out of the gate, they had that rough playoff end last season. So, they're looking on a mission. And I sort of compare it to the run with Virginia basketball. 2 years ago, they were upset by the 16 seed, never been done before. And then the next year, they ended up winning the national championship. So I think with Tampa, getting ousted by Columbus, who was, the lowest playoff team, and they got swept by them, it doesn't get any more embarrassing than that. So I think they do have the potential to win it all. But I think it's a little up in the air because we don't know how teams are going to look. They haven't played in 4 or 5 months. So it's pretty much a new season in itself. But I think the favorite for me, I think it's the Boston Bruins. I think they're complete everywhere they are. They got the best top line in the league. They got a shutdown pairing with Charlie McAvoy. They got incredible other defensemen like Torrey Krug. Zdeno Chara is still, up there in age, but he's still effective defensively. So I think they've got the most complete team, and then they also have Tuukka Rask in net. So I know a lot of people don't like the Bruins, but I do like their chances heading into the Stanley Cup playoffs for sure.
And, obviously this is going to be really different because not a lot of teams will get to play at home. Only two teams will, Toronto, Edmonton. Do you think Toronto, Edmonton have an advantage? Do you think playing at home will benefit them, or do you think everyone has kind of an equal opportunity?
Yeah, I think both teams have an equal opportunity just because if Toronto and Edmonton were to have an advantage of just playing on their home ice, it'd just be of being used to it, right? But since the main concept of having home ice advantage is the impact of the crowd, since there's going to be none of that, I don't think it'll affect everyone a ton. I think people are already distracted enough with all this pandemic stuff, so I think that it won't play a big part. But if we do notice something, we will end up seeing it for sure.
Now, moving on to the MLB. So MLB past week, it hasn't been the best for them. Obviously, the big Marlins COVID outbreak wasn't very beneficial to the MLB. At least 14 members got sick, and it's terrible. And other members of other teams got sick as well, but this was kind of the biggest outbreak. What do you think led to this? Why did this happen? Because, the MLB kept praising that they're taking all the safety measures, that they're doing daily COVID tests, that, they're enforcing these rules. Why do you think this happened?
Yeah, so I think the main thing that happened was that they didn't follow, the same idea as the rest of the other sports leagues. I think it would have been a great idea to just keep them in, a little bubble, all 30 teams in a bubble, and then play your 60-game season through there. So I think that's what happened. And also with the Marlins, Florida is the most dangerous state now in the U.S. for COVID. So I think with Marlins players, they still had that freedom of going out and whatnot. So that's the issue there. So I think it does ultimately stem because the MLB didn't end up making it into a bubble situation like the NHL and the NBA. Because when you have teams traveling to other team or to other stadiums, you still risk the danger of spreading the virus. So if you have your players in a bubble, you have the ability to contain them and make sure that teams are still playing each other, but also everyone's safe and everyone is making sure that they're not spreading that virus, and you have control over everyone and making sure everything works out well. So I think the bubble idea is the best idea to continue sports in North America. And if the MLB had done that from day one, I think they would have been fine.
Do you think this outbreak will lead to more outbreaks? And do you think the MLB season will go on, or do you think they will have to cut it short?
Personally, I don't know. It's really up in the air. I think the MLB should rush into making a bubble situation. I think they see that the MLB or the NHL and the NBA are doing a marvelous job with what they've done. I think they're going to try to find a way to replicate that and make sure that this happens. So as far as the MLB, I really don't know whether or not it's going to be canceled or not, but I think they're going to have to find a way to do something like what the NHL and the NBA are doing. So it'll have to be soon and it'll have to be quick.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the Marlins home opener has already been called off against Baltimore, and games are already being canceled. So I think they really need to make a decision right now, or they're going to face some really serious consequences. But another issue in the MLB is, the Blue Jays don't have a place to play. Basically, they were denied by the Canadian federal government to play in Canada, which is understandable since the Canada doesn't want American teams coming in and out, and I understand that. But what do you think? Because they allowed, an NHL in Toronto and Edmonton, they allowed other leagues, but they didn't allow the Blue Jays to host in the Sky Dome. What do you think about that?
I think it's because of teams coming in and out. I think the difference between having the NHL and having MLB teams was that the MLB doesn't apply that bubble system. So you're going to have teams be there for 3 days, not quarantine, and then leave. Because, we require that 14-day period of, following a travel to stay quarantined, and then you can go out and do whatever you want. And with MLB teams, they don't have the time to do that. They still have to go from team to team and travel. So you're there for 3 days and get out. And that's the prime way of, spreading a virus. So I think that's why the NHL is completely okay with it, with every team has to quarantine for 14 days for sure. But then, they have to play and they're there for the entire time. So I think that's why the MLB wasn't so keen on being in Canada.
Absolutely. And where do you think the Jays will end up playing?
Yeah, so I think they're playing in Buffalo, where the AAA team plays. So I think that's a pretty good location. You're still close to, relatively close to a few teams in their division. I think they're pretty close to, the Yanks, and usually they're traveling most of the time. But regardless, I don't think it'll be a big issue, just because, there's still no fans, so there's no crowd impact or anything like that. So I think they'll be okay.
And for sure, I absolutely agree with that. And different teams are handling the situation differently, I would say. But one thing that I really like that the Jays are doing, the Jays said that if a player on their team breaks quarantine, they will face a $750,000 fine and also might face jail time. That's kind of extreme. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great idea. I think the main thing is keeping your players safe, and if they're not following the rules, then that means they're not committed to the team. And when you're not committed to the team, that's when punishment and fines happen. I think it's a great idea by the Blue Jays. Some players might see it as strict, but at the end of the day, you're there to win ball games for your club, for your teammates, etc. And when you're breaking quarantine rules and you're trying to go out, like what Lou Williams was trying to do on the Clippers, it's just an all-around bad situation, and you don't really want that to happen. Say you do get the virus, then it's a bad look on everyone. So I think implementing this possibility of a punishment is a great idea, and I think it will help in the long run for the Jays in regards to this pandemic.
For sure. And now I think, I think that should be enforced throughout the league, not just for the Jays. I think that could have stopped a lot of the outbreaks that have happened, but we'll see. I hope they get a grip on it, because the situation isn't really good right now in the MLB, but I really do hope they fix it up. But moving on to the last major league that I do want to talk about today is the NBA. So NBA, as you mentioned, Rain, have been handling this whole thing pretty well. And they're doing, unlike the NHL, they're doing one bubble in Disneyland is kind of, which I think is the best idea, because first of all, they're not in the way of anyone. Disneyland is its own thing. They're not in the way of people. Second of all, I think one place is better to have than, two different cities. But why do you think the NHL didn't do that?
I think it was just because of travel situations. I think they didn't want some teams to go so far, and I think it was probably a little tough to find like a Disneyland type resort for them, for all teams to stay in. And I think hockey's a little different, because hockey, you have to deal with the players' equipment and all their stuff and whatnot. So I think a lot of factors had to play into it. But I think the NBA did a perfect job with maintaining Disneyland and having 22 teams there, and try to fight for a playoff spot. It's a great idea. I think it's the best one we've seen all year.
For sure. And now the Raptors have just had their first kind of exhibition scrimmage. They beat the Blazers. Great game. Ibaka scored 19 points. Siakam 18. Gasol was in great shape. I think they're in great shape. But a lot of people, are doubting them and saying they can't repeat what they did last season. What do you think? How far can the Raptors go?
I think they can go off how far they please. I still think that they are, one big time player short of being a legitimate NBA champion, but I still think they are a contender possibly make it all the way to the finals. I think the Raptors have the best system in place in the NBA. I think they can play in any type of playing style. They can play small, they can play big. They can switch players. They have multiple guards that they play. So I think the Raptors have they also have a very excellent defensive scheme with Nick Nurse. But I still think that they are that one big player short. And at the end of the day, uh, when you don't have that against a Giannis Antetokounmpo, or you don't have that, against any other Eastern team, I think they do match up well with every other Eastern Conference team. It's just the Bucks that they would probably have to worry about.
And in general speaking, obviously there are teams who are the favorites, Bucks, Lakers, Clippers, they're the top teams. But again, same question with that as I asked you with the NHL. Who do you think are the top teams in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think the top team for me is obviously the Los Angeles Lakers. I think number four for LeBron James will be coming this year. I'm very confident in that. But I'll give you two teams that I think that will have a very good run. I think the first team that no one is really looking at is the Miami Heat. I think they've done a marvelous job into retooling the roster over the past few years. Acquiring a person like Jimmy Butler, and we saw this season the resurgence of Bam Adebayo, who's become a top flight center in this league now, and just earned a playoff All-Star appearance. But I also like the depth they have. Coming off the bench, they have for a former top 5 MVP voted in Goran Dragic, who's coming off the bench, and he does a marvelous job. But you also have the defenders that can, or very skilled defenders in Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder, who they just picked up over the trade deadline. So I think adding them to the team, it gives them an opportunity to have different looks in their lineup, and also gives them an opportunity with the Iggy, who can be that primary ball handler, and with Jay Crowder as well, who can also be a spot up shooter. But with the Heat as well, I think no one really or people do talk about is their young core as well. Aside from Jimmy Butler and Adebayo being the two main players on that team, they also have guys like Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, who in my opinion should be second in rookie voting, and they also have Duncan Robinson, who's turned into a top 3 shooter in the league. So I think the Miami Heat has a very good chance of going far in the playoffs. And I think in the Western Conference, a team that we should be looking at is the Denver Nuggets. I think when they have Jamal Murray coming back, I think they have a very underrated backcourt that no one talks about, and Gary Harris as well. I think he's a great player. And then we're not even mentioning Nikola Jokic, who has slimmed down and he looks great. And, he was playing point guard this preseason. And, a lot of people are talking about Bol Bol, who is, excellent in, the exhibition games. But, yeah, I think Denver also has a potential to, go far and possibly make some damage in the playoffs.
For sure. And that kind of wraps it up with the big leagues. I think we've pretty much covered everything, and it was really nice hearing your opinion, Rain, on certain situations. And now the last question I want to ask you, have any other sports organizations, I know you follow UFC, golf has been on, certain tennis competitions have been on. What other sport kind of surprised you, and what other sport do you think handled this pandemic pretty well?
Yeah, I think it's without a doubt the UFC and what they were able to do. I think once the pandemic hit, Dana White was really assured on making sure something happened and making sure these fighters fight and make their money. So I think the ideas of having the event in Jacksonville, where everything started with UFC 249, and then going to the Apex, which is their own facility. So having that own facility where you can host your own fights is remarkable, and it's pretty much unheard of with a major sports league. So the fact that they could just use their own offices to host fights is incredible in itself. And then they changed the game with Abu Dhabi. I think they inspired a lot of the leagues just because they had their own island and they had their own bubble for fighters to come in and out, and they had just a perfect way to deal with the travel and making sure people are quarantined before they go out and do their weight cut and whatnot. And they also hosted incredible events. I mean, the fights that they put on were spectacular. Some were heartbreaking to me, but the fights in general were incredible to watch, and it really made my quarantine a lot better.
Well, Rain, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for coming on the show and, kind of filling us in on all the latest news in the OHL youth sports. And do you want to tell everyone how they can reach you on social media?
Yeah, so my username is Bringer of Rain on Twitter, and you can see a lot of my updates. I tweet about everything: Michigan athletics, youth sports, the OHL draft, the NHL draft, some Oakville Blades stuff as well, and also a lot of UFC coverage. So check that out. Elizabeth, thank you so much for having me on, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and I wish you all the best on your projects, and to hope to see you again on this show someday.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Well, everyone, that was Reed Hernandez, my fellow colleague at the Ryerson University in the Sport Media program. Please go follow him on social media. He tweets a lot of great content, and he tweets a lot about different sports, so make sure to follow him. But now I do want to cover a few other topics. They're not really topics, I just didn't discuss them with Rain because there's not much to discuss. They're kind of just pieces of news that I wanted to tell you guys. So again, I'm going to go a little bit through all the leagues, and then I'm also going to talk a bit about tennis and figure skating. So first of all, Canadian in the NFL, as I mentioned, they're all set to go. They've kind of agreed on all the regulations, but a player already opted out of the season. So the first player, and it's a Canadian player, Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, opted out of the season. He's an offensive lineman, and he plays for Kansas City Chiefs. And he's 29 years old, and he will not be playing. But the reason for it is quite unique. He said that he is going to earn his medical degree at McGill University and wants to fulfill his requirements so he can help COVID patients and become a doctor in the off season. And basically what he said really touched me. So I'm going to read a quote that he said because it was really emotional, and I couldn't believe, a player of his rank that makes a lot of money would make such a selfless decision. So basically he said, quote, "This is one of the most difficult decisions I have had to make in my life, but I must follow my convictions and do what I believe is right for me personally." He said that if he is going to risk his health, it's going to be to help others get better. So I just found that very emotional and very kind of unique because it's not every day that you see a major league player make such a selfless decision. So amazing there. And as I mentioned, as we talked about with Rain, the NFL Players Associations has already come to an agreement, and they're going to start off the season very soon. The league has proposed a minimum salary cap of $175 million for 2021. This season's cap is $198.2 million. So that's quite interesting as well, but I can't wait to see how the NFL season will play out. As we talked about with Rain, I think they had a little bit of an advantage there because they could observe the leagues, how other leagues have been handling it. But another piece of news in the NFL is that Antonio Brown he's demanding clarity from the NFL so he can return to playing football. So it's quite a complicated situation that most of you probably know. So 2 days after announcing his retirement, Antonio Brown actually started demanding clarity on his personal conduct investigation, as everyone already knows, from the National Football League, and said that he would actually like to play one last season. So on an Instagram post last week, he said that the NFL is dragging this out, dragging out the conduct investigation, and that he already received interest from the Baltimore Ravens and Seattle Seahawks as potential kind of teams he might want to play on, and now he's just waiting on the NFL so they can like wrap up the whole investigation so the teams can sign him. So that's quite confusing. Honestly, I don't know what to think of this situation because I thought he was retiring. I thought this was kind of it, but turns out he still wants to play, and now he's blaming the NFL. But you know, these things take time, and I don't think he should be complaining, if I can say that. But going to be interesting to see how this will turn out. So as I talked about with Rain as well, Washington is rebranding from the Redskins. They're going to go by the Washington football team for a little while. Players' jersey numbers will be replaced with a logo on Washington's helmets. So there will be no logo of Washington, you know, previous logo that represented Redskins will not be anywhere. So it's going to be interesting to see, and I can't wait to hear what their new name will be. But now, going to continue with news, moving on to the NHL, where we talked about the staff arrival in Edmonton and Toronto. But now, in other news, Arizona Coyotes GM Chaika has terminated his contract. So Steve Sullivan has been named interim GM right now. He was assistant GM, but that's kind of comes as a surprise because now it's probably the worst time to kind of get a new GM since the season is starting out right now. So, but this is a quote from Chaika himself. I'm going to read it to you guys because I think it's quite important. So he said, quote, "I love our players, coaches, staff, and fans, and I very much wish I could be with the team in Edmonton. Sadly, the situation created by ownership made that an impossibility." So he says there was a kind of a miscommunication with management. So I'm not sure what the situation is. I know there's been kind of a miscommunication brewing there for a while, and I'm not sure what the issue is, but we'll see. And I don't know, this is a huge kind of downset for the Arizona Coyotes because, well, to not have a GM or to have a last minute replacement right when the season is starting isn't the best. But Chaika was a great GM. He was named GM of the Coyotes on May 5th, 2016, and was promoted to president of hockey operations on July 12, 2017, only at age 26. So he became the youngest GM in NHL and North America major sports history. I mean, it's crazy to think 26. I mean, have such a big position at 26. Most people still live with their parents at 26. So that's quite something. That was very impressive, and I personally really liked him as a GM. And this is really sad news, but I'm sure there's a reasonable reasoning behind it. But the Coyotes are set to take on Nashville Predators in the qualifying round that starts August 2nd in Edmonton. So I hope everything works out. I hope they do well, and you know, when there will be any updates on the situation, I will for sure fill you guys in. But another piece of news, this is quite negative news, quite sad, that all of you probably already heard, but I'm just going to mention it once again. Maple Leafs legend Eddie Shack has died at age 83. So Eddie Shack, he was one of the NHL's best players. He was also known for his cowboy hat, for his positive attitude, and he unfortunately died on Saturday at age 83, as I already mentioned. Shaq won 4 Stanley Cups with the Toronto Maple Leafs in the 1960s, including their last victory in 1967. So he was quite a big deal. His nickname was the Entertainer because, as I mentioned, he had quite a big personality on and off the ice. He was known for his mustache and cowboy hat, and he was just a great person, a great player. His teammates always spoke very greatly of him. Shaq collected 239 goals, 465 points, and 1,431 penalty minutes in 1,047 NHL games. He also added six. He was just amazing. He did it all, and he won their last. Basically last Stanley Cup. So I hope they really honor him, and he was a great person, and we're sad to see him go, but I just wanted to honor him on the show here today. Moving on, Montreal Canadiens player Brett Kulak tested positive for COVID-19. So as we know, in Canada, Montreal is one of the cities that kind of has the most COVID cases right now. So Habs player Brett Kulak has tested positive. The defenseman said that Friday he tested positive for COVID-19 after arriving to Montreal for phase 3. He joined the team session for the first time on Thursday, said he experienced some headaches, lack of energy, difficulty breathing, but is feeling back to normal right now, which I'm not very surprised, as Montreal is kind of a hotspot in Canada for COVID cases. And this news actually came only one day after fellow Montreal Canadian Javier Ouellet said he tested positive for COVID too, but he was asymptomatic, so he felt completely fine. So it's kind of weird. Canada has been dealing with their cases pretty well, and the only kind of province is Quebec that has quite a few cases right now. I think, well, obviously Ontario as well, but Quebec is kind of the hotspot for cases in Canada right now. But I think they're really doing a better job right now, and cases have been going down. So I hope everything turns out well. But now moving on to the NBA, as I talked with Rain, I'm really happy for the Raptors. They had their scrimmage. They won against the Blazers, and they've been doing really well. So I'm really happy, and I can't wait to see what they produce in the season. I think Nick Nurse really has a big plan for them, and I can't wait what they produce. But in other news, NBA is investigating player Williams' quarantine length. So basically, Los Angeles Clippers guard Low Williams has left the bubble basically for family reasons. He said it was an extreme situation, but now certain news sources show that he might have been at a club when he had left the bubble. So the primary issues said that there was a photo of Williams with a recording artist, Jack Harlow. The person basically told that Williams is wearing an NBA-issued mask that he would only be able to get inside the bubble. So this photo couldn't have been from before, and they're investigating the situation right now. But I think if that is the case, and he did go to the club when he was only supposed to, go see his family, I think it was for a personal matter, I think that would be terrible. And, my respect for this player would fall completely, because to put in danger your teammates in this way just for a few hours of partying would just be ridiculous, heartless, and, I just hope it's not true. But all the evidence says it is true, and I think if it is, he should be punished. He shouldn't be allowed to play, and I want to see how this situation plays out, but I'm really hoping it's just not true. But now moving on, MLB, as I said, lots of cases, outbreak with the Marlins. So this outbreak raised really big doubts for MLB. They don't know if they'll be able to finish the season, which I said from the start. I said that I am really skeptical if the MLB will actually be able to finish this season because they're not handling it the best. They didn't come up with a bubble, as I talked about with Rain. They didn't do a bubble. They didn't do hub cities. They kind of just thought they would roll with it as usual, and it didn't work. It's not working, and they need to take really serious measures. And I think, as I mentioned, I think the same thing should be enforced throughout the league as the Jays have enforced, which is basically do a $750,000 fine and also jail time for players who break quarantine. I think that's the only solution as per right now, but terrible. And I think there is a really big possibility that the MLB might not be able to finish their season. I think there really is a huge possibility. A big center fielder, Nick Senzel, fell sick Sunday, and a day after, a teammate went on the injured list because he tested positive, and then more players got sick, and players continue to get sick. So I don't know how this will turn out. I think I agree with what we talked about with Rain. I think the NBA is dealing with this the best because they're being really, really strict about players leaving the bubble. They're testing every day. They're being really, really strict about the bubble and about health regulations. So I think the MLB is really lacking that. So I hope they get a grip on it, but we'll see how it goes. Moving on to tennis. Tennis is a sport that was handling it pretty well, and now it's kind of gone totally downhill. So the WTA finals and 10 other tennis tournaments in China have been completely canceled. So 11 men's and women's tennis tournaments planned to be hosted in China in October and November, including the big WTA finals, which I was excited for. And all of that was canceled this Thursday because of the coronavirus pandemic. Obviously, China isn't the best place to have these tournaments. And the next Grand Slam tournament as of now is the US Open, which hasn't been canceled yet, thank God, and which is supposed to start in New York on August 31st. I don't know if that's going to happen because New York is right now, as many other cities in America, is a hot spot for COVID-19. So I don't know how that's going to play out. I really hope that it doesn't get canceled, but I also hope that they follow all the safety protocols. But it's really sad to see that so many tennis competitions did get canceled because at first I thought tennis was handling this pretty well. I thought everything was going to go according to plan, but of course I do understand this, and especially considering they were going to be hosted in China. So I'm glad they canceled it, but I'm also kind of sad that I won't be seeing tennis in October and November. But regardless, another tournament that also has been canceled is ATP's return at City Open. Basically, ATP has been canceled. The City Open, which was scheduled to relaunch the men's tennis season, it has been canceled according to a report from the New York Times. The tournament was scheduled to be played August 13th until August 21st, just a week before the US Open was scheduled to begin. So the City Open was canceled due to coronavirus, obvious reasons. So basically they thought it would just not be safe enough, which I understand, but I don't know how they expect to host the US Open if they can't host these smaller tournaments. So I don't know. Plus, I hope they don't cancel it especially because Bianca Andreescu is one of the favorites to win the US Open again, and Jeannie Bouchard is doing a lot better. So a lot of Canadians to look forward to in the US Open this time. So I really hope they don't cancel it. But again, as I have mentioned many times before, I'm all for protecting the health of athletes, taking every safety measure possible. So we'll see how that plays out. But now moving on to a sport that I haven't talked about in a while, and I'm very sorry, and it is one of my favorite sports. It is figure skating. So not a lot of news has been happening in figure skating. That's probably why I haven't talked too much about it. But Maria Gerber, black skater, came out and said that there is a lot of racism in figure skating. Something as simple as a costume kind of illustrates the problem. So what she means by this is the mesh on figure skating costumes is not made to match darker skin tones. It's usually just white or just slightly darker, and it usually doesn't look as good on darker skinned people. So she said, quote, representation matters 100%. You're constantly in a space where you're told you don't have the look, you're not beautiful. I agree. I think there is a certain point of racism in figure skating. I think there is body shaming in figure skating. I think, in figure skating, judges and coaches want you to be this perfect, white princess with long legs and a skinny body. And, people are different. So I think that perception really needs to change. And Maria Gerber is a perfect example of that, why it needs to change. So Gerber began her skating career at age 5. Her grandmother was the one who signed her up for lessons, and she loved it. So instead of heading to college, she hopped on a plane and she kind of started her figure skating career. And she said that she faced a lot of racism throughout the years, and she said one of the things she really noticed was the costumes that she couldn't find a single costume that matched her skin tone. Mesh and tights were an ongoing issue for Gerber. She says to this day, almost no companies make mesh to match certain shades of skin. And, it's really, really sad because especially now there are a lot of figure skaters who are multicultural, who do have darker skin tones, and they just can't find a costume to fit their skin tone, which is quite sad. So I think, figure skating organizations should really rethink that, and costume manufacturers as well. And I think a really big change should happen. But now, another piece of news in figure skating that I do want to talk about that I'm extremely excited about, it's that Soraya Bonali, one of my favorite figure skaters, came on Player's Own Voice podcast on CBC to talk about also her life being, a Black female in figure skating, and about her legendary backflip. So for those of you who don't know, Soraya Bonali was the first woman to ever perform a backflip on ice in competition. The jump still remains illegal to this day, but she just didn't care. She kind of really revolutionized the sport, yet she was considered herself as a rebel. She basically, in the Olympics that she performed in, the backflip was illegal, but she still went on and did it because she just didn't care, because the judges were against her, because she wasn't as tall. She was also African American, not African American. She was Black, and she was, didn't fit the narrative of figure skating. So she's one of my favorite skaters. I absolutely love her. I love that she was kind of a rebel and did whatever she wanted and did the backflip. And I think she really did revolutionize the sport. So now what I want to do is show you guys a video of her doing the backflip at the Olympics. So let me just pull it up here on my computer so you guys could see it. So this is going to be a video from the 1998 Olympics in Nagano. Sorry for the slow. I'm going to restart it right here. Watch out for the backflip. Super exciting.
ショート終わって私の動きはこれが限界。表彰台は多分難しい。しかし精一杯やりますと話していた鶴谷。
Beautiful routine. And again, if you pay attention to her leotard, the areas where you would normally see mesh, there is no mesh. It's just plain because, you know, there is rarely a mesh that fits like Surya bodies. She is a French gymnast, French figure skater, just by the way, if some of you didn't know. Beautiful jump. She did fall here, but other than that, this routine is completely perfect. I don't know how well you guys can see this, and I know you probably cannot hear the music just because Zoom doesn't have the best quality, but I just want you guys to see one specific part of it, which is the backflip. Again, beautiful jump.
Loop. と3回転の両足か。
Beautiful combination. I love her unique moves too. Beautiful dance steps.
Loop. そのままダブルループ。ダブルアクセル。
And right there, the backflip that was illegal for her to do, yet she still did it.
これは
Beautiful.
アマチュアの競技会では認められてい
And
ます。
she got points deducted for that, but she just didn't care. Beautiful routine.
そらくこれが最後のオリンピック。今月の14日に実は
So
新しい怪我がまた再発しまして、今朝の
that was a really amazing routine, and now you probably understand why she kind of revolutionized the sport. But anyway, go check out the full interview with her, and you can really hear her story on Claire's Own Voice podcast, which can be found on the CDC website. Please check it out. Awesome interview. But now, unfortunately, I do have to wrap up the show for today. Again, please follow Rain Hernandez, who is here on the show today, on his social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and also other sites as well. And you can find me on Instagram, e.rossison, and on Twitter, erossison. Make sure to tune into that. And also tune in every Saturday at 1 p.m. to the Dismount Show that I host about gymnastics. And also 12:30 to 2 p.m. every Monday for the Elizabeth Rossison Show. And also every Tuesday, which is tomorrow at 10:30 p.m., the Sports Wrap with Elizabeth. So make sure to do that as well. I will cover all the major sports events that are going on right now, and also catch me as a guest on other shows as well. Thank you so much for watching, and also remember that this show can also be heard on the BarnBurner radio network on its 122 platforms. And please check out the barnburner.ca website for all news. We have articles, we have radio, we have video, we have a lot of different content for you guys, so make sure to do that. BarnBurner, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been Elizabeth Rossison, and have a great day.